let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annabelle Huang. I will be the moderator for this panel, focusing more on the infrastructure side, especially on the institutional perspective for infra builders. We have three amazing panelists today. I'll let you guys introduce yourself a little bit.
Hello, my name is Matt, and I work on the strategic partnerships team at 1inch.
Hi, my name is Derka. I am a co-founder at Zircuit. Zircuit is an Ethereum layer 2 with hardened security. It actively searches for hacks and prevents them from happening. And through this safe infrastructure, we provide the best and safest access to on-chain yield opportunities, guaranteeing that principal will never be lost to hackers.
Testing. Okay. Hi, I'm Kenny. I'm co-founder of Manta Network, which is the largest modular L2 in the Ethereum ecosystem. We're a team of around 40 people that have been building for the past 5 years. And, my own background, prior to starting Manta, I was finishing up my master's at MIT, where I was the teaching assistant for Gary Gensler, who was the former chairman of the US SEC. So thinking about regulatory compliance, institutional adoption is kind of, brings back fond memories. Happy to be here.
Yes, thanks, Caladan, for pulling this together. Quick intro about myself as well. I am the co-founder and CEO of Altius Labs. We're focusing on building high-performance infrastructure that can bring modular execution layer for different blockchains. And prior to that, I was a managing partner for Amber Group that's more focused around liquidity provisioning for on-chain assets. So been in the space for a while. I think we have... everybody here is pretty OG as well. We can probably kick off with more of a market timing question around infrastructure. We all know that building performant, reliable infrastructure takes years, but also at the same time, the market trends and applications can change pretty quickly, depends on the different cycles or the narratives. So how do we balance building for specific use cases versus building or taking years to build a very performant infrastructure?
I can start. So at 1inch, we've actually prioritized shipping fast, and we want to get our product out there so that way we can really test it and see if there's demand for it. Instead of spending 6 months working on like an MVP or something and having the market change during that time, we want to ship it as fast as possible. Recently, we've actually started doing like in-house hackathons, like internal hackathons. So we have the entire company on board, like shipping products as fast as possible. And then of course, iterating after we launch it. So kind of gives us like launch first and then listen to the market and see like if it works, and if it doesn't, then be adaptable.
It's a very Web3 approach.
I think it's very important to acknowledge that, markets are cyclical and builders actually have to react to that, right? So, if you sort of find a narrative or find a hype that is right now active, it's way too late. You should have been building half a year ago for that. So, it's a constant game of predicting what's coming up, what is the next narrative, what should we be building? I would like to 100% agree. It's very, very important to be flexible. You have to be ready to pivot. You have to be ready to change your focus. You have to be, ready to react.
Yeah. I think, just thinking about how the industry sort of grows, right? Like, I really like to give this one example, which is, the most popular app in existence today on blockchain is, or not today maybe, but used to be, Pump Fun, right? Now Hyperliquid is eating its cake, and now Aster is eating Hyperliquid's cake, right? So it's a game of eating cake. But back then, Pump Fun was the de facto case study for the industry. And so, we're all extremely proud of it, as we should be. Made a bunch of money. The team, right? Per person, each person driving in probably like 1 billion in revenue. It's crazy. But if you look at it from a metrics perspective, the maximum cap of daily active users there was around like 170,000 DAUs, right? So 170,000 people coming to Pump Fun every single day. How many of them are bots? I don't know, but let's just take that number, at a face value. Now, if you compare that with any sort of Web 2 metrics, you see something like Duolingo, right? Like you guys know Duolingo, that language app that teaches you French or Spanish or Chinese or whatever, right? That app has 20 million daily active users, right? And Duolingo is not like the top app on the App Store. It's just one of thousands of top apps on the App Store. And I think like that sort of delineation between, you know, the industry's best at 200,000 versus the other industry's average at 20 million shows us just how much of a long way we have to go. And so, you know, one of the key takeaways I have from that is there's not enough use cases in this space. You know, obviously infrastructure is extremely important. Behind Duolingo, behind Instagram, behind TikTok, what is that? That's AWS, that's Amazon, that's Microsoft Azure, that's Google Cloud, right? The infrastructure layer is extremely critical. But I think like what Web3 hasn't really found in this balance is how do you create these really amazing apps while simultaneously bringing that support to the infrastructure layer? You know, going back to the point about trends, I think you know, we have very short-term memory in this space, but just I'd say 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, it was all about apps. And then VCs were like, oh, you know, there's not enough infra. And the next thing you know, everyone pivoted to infra. And now there's way too many L2s and not enough apps. And so now everyone's pivoting back to apps. But I think like, you know, for our industry to really grow, we have to find that balance that we haven't quite struck yet.
Thank you for that honest take. And I agree. I think it's very dynamic approach of building the apps and then realizing maybe we need to build better infra to support it, and then realizing we still need to find more use cases for the infra. And I think at Altius, what we're trying to build is also to shorten that time to take infrastructure to market. If it doesn't take 2 years to build the next performant or reliable infra, can we actually iterate that app cycle faster? But yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's an elephant in the room also. And I hate to bring it up, but AI is playing like a huge role in this, because right now it's like you can build an app faster than ever. So like the speed to go to market is shortening drastically. Like in our own development teams, they're using a lot of AI toolage, and like it's really speeding things up. So like how do you adapt your entire company to that, like when everyone else is jumping on board?
I actually love it. It's beautiful, right? You used to have a software developer, and that software developer was a single software developer. Now you have a software developer, and that software developer can have a team of AI tools, you know, under them. So suddenly you don't have 40 people. You have 40 people plus however much you are willing to spend in the cloud on compute.
Yeah. I think it's a trap though, because you know, when you like, you look across all these L2s and, you know, there's hundreds, if not thousands of smart contracts on them. Just like there's hundreds, if not thousands of apps that you can deploy with AI, but that doesn't mean they're going to be good apps, right? Like, right. That's the difference between a successful one and an unsuccessful one. The marketing, the revenue model, the team, right? The networking, the growth, all this other stuff. And I think like, you know, we in the Web3 space, I think a lot of certain ways of doing things currently are taken for granted because, you know, again, just 3 years ago, our memory of a goldfish, right? Like it was all about technology. Like if I could beat you on TPS, if I could use ZK to add into whatever it is, then all of a sudden it's supposed to be this wonderful new product, right? But at the end of the day, we saw it's not a wonderful new product. In fact, it may be even more complicated to use than usual. And it's the exact antithesis of what a good product should be, because every product manager knows you got to remove the clicks. You got to remove the latency. You got to make it as simple and easy to use as possible for the user. And so I don't think using AI solves this. I think using AI just allows us to lower the barrier of entry for spamming the market with a bunch of prototypes.
Pump fun for prototypes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's ChatGPT and Claude.
I guess we're trying and error. But I think it's a good segue into the next topic I wanted to bring up, which is what we talked about, right? The app side or ecosystem side versus the infrastructure side. How should we think about the dynamics there? And then there's also I think in terms of building infra, there are the camp of building the general purpose infra, and there's the camp that's building more app specific or purpose built. I'm sure you guys all have specific takes on that, so I wanted to hear what you think really the future of at least Web3 infra is headed.
Yeah, from the 1inch standpoint, we generally focus on the more general infra because it gives us flexibility. So as the market moves, as different assets receive different amounts of demand, we're seeing like RWAs starting to come out and becoming more popular. Having this more general outlook and general direction allows us to adapt quickly. Also based off of like institutional needs as those change along with the market, maybe with a little bit of latency, but that said, like it still allows us to adapt. Whereas like if we were to build just a niche market or a niche product, like say like some of the regular DEXs are, it's a lot less adaptable. There might still be a use case, but then as the market changes, they also have to keep up and adapt, which we're seeing in some cases also.
So we essentially live in the universe of trends. You know, today hyperliquid is trendy. At some point, I can, see a future where it might not be as trendy and it will be replaced by something else, right? If you lock yourself into a single topic, single application, and it is the only thing that your infrastructure can support, I actually, do not think that this is a good way that has a very long future. So I'm a huge proponent of standing a little bit more on the general side, but it's certainly a fine line. You could build a platform that is like super, super, super general, and then 99.999% of features will never, ever, ever be used, right? So you've just essentially wasted 99.999% of effort. Because why did you do that, right? So I think that everybody needs to find that, but it cannot be just about a single thing.
I think that the world of infrastructure is going to be completely different in 2 to 3 years. The world of infrastructure today is, let's say you have Ethereum, the L1, and then a bunch of different L2s, right? Whether it's Zircuit or Manta or Linea in the room, right? But I think the next generation of infrastructure is going to be projects like Altius. It's going to be projects like Caldera, right? Like these are the services, the infrastructure as a service providers that allow you to spin up these open source eventual commodities at a fast scale, which enables in Web 2 things like full stack programming, right? Like a full stack programmer doesn't waste his time thinking, should I deploy on AWS or should I deploy on Microsoft Azure? Should I use Intel CPUs or should I use AMD and what operating system, all this stuff? They just go to some type of platform that does all the backend for them. And then all they have to worry about is building an amazing app, and all the scalability and the automation and all that stuff is handled in the background. That's not what happens in Web3 today, right? Like we're all here trying to pitch these commodity infrastructures and trying to pretend like it's the next big thing. But like we got to get past that stage and realize that it doesn't matter because everything is open source. And so what we're really trying to innovate on is finding the best solution as a layer 2, as a scalability solution. And then that scalability solution becomes the next generation commodity that can be deployed by Caldera, that can be deployed through Altius, right? And so like these are, I think like that's what the future of infrastructure truly will look like, because everything in technology scales horizontally, right? Like anything, for any developers in the room that have worked with servers and all this stuff, you're not going to be like, okay, let me buy the biggest server that anyone has ever built and then try to jam my application on that. No, it doesn't work like that. You just take commodity servers that aren't necessarily optimized specifically for your application. It doesn't matter, because if you need to get more users onto your application, what do? You just scale out horizontally and add more servers. Like to assume that, L2s or any other L1 that's hyper scalable is going to break this whole paradigm is, I think, a bit naive. And I think eventually we're going to see that sort of same scalability pattern on the blockchain, and that's going to be enabled through these sort of services.
Thank you for that take again, as usual. And I think we talked a little bit about performance, right? And obviously, your Web2 analogy shows that there is specialized service providers that focus on certain different parts of performance, and then the app builders will get to do what they do best in terms of adoption and user acquisition. So how should we think about that in the Web3 lens? How much do performance matter, and what do the ecosystem actually want? And how are you guys allocating resources or thinking about that as priorities?
Well, if you go to a developer who has some Web3 project and you tell them, hey, I have the most beautiful network in the universe, it's the fastest, or I don't know, it provides the best access to RPC, they will still ask you, who else is on your network? You know, what are the other ecosystem projects that I will be able to interact with? Or, you know, what is essentially your distribution? And if you say that you don't have any, then they're going to ignore you. So it's not only about technology. That ecosystem, it really matters, because in the end, you know, in blockchain, we like financial applications, right? Arthur in the morning said trading through our many cycles proved to be the killer use case and super use case, right? In 2020, 2021, we had a huge boom in DeFi. It was all about composability and, you know, funneling these monies from one project to another to generate yield and more yield. It's all about the ecosystem. If you're the only thing that exists on a blockchain, probably the blockchain is probably not going to be too popular.
Yeah, I completely agree. As an aggregator and interacting with all these hundreds of different protocols and multiple chains as well, we see that like if you just optimize for one thing, it may work for the market temporarily, but then the market's going to change. And so then like you need to be able to optimize and adapt at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, when it comes to infrastructure performance, I guess, you know, the higher level question is, does it matter? But I think it breaks down to, who does it matter for, right? Like the people that are using the apps, it's going to matter when they can't access their apps. Right? Like it's a very reactive problem for the end user, but it's a very proactive problem for the developer. And so, you know, when I'm deploying an application, I think a lot about, okay, how do I make sure that my app is up 100% of the time, right? Because if it's only up 50% of the time, it doesn't matter how much money you can make. Someone else is going to do the same thing. They're going to have better uptime. They're going to have better user experience, right? And ultimately, they're going to ideally capture the market, right? That's how it happens in theory. So for developers, definitely, I think performance is extremely critical. But when it comes to the end users, right, it's all about the user experience.
Exactly. And then I think talking about ecosystem, a big topic is, again, around incentives. And Web3 is unique because you have token as incentives as well. So I'm curious to hear. I mean, I've been in a space for a while. I've seen maybe different types of tokenomics and different incentives. But in your mind, maybe what is the best way to reward early adopters of your online technology or application versus a sustainable long-term model for that?
I think a hybrid approach is the way to go. I mean, we've seen tons of airdrops. A lot of them are failures, and it does a lot of damage to the company and the projects that are launching them if handled poorly. But I think like a hybrid approach of where, yeah, you could do some sort of like token allocation to early users in order to kind of attract some buzz to start with. It's almost like an early like marketing technique works, but then long term, you really need to drive value for your users. So like if they're coming to your platform just to farm an airdrop and then they leave, like, you know, you're not providing any value. So what we try to do is like, we've always tried to do actually since day one, is just provide like the absolute best rates for the users. And that's like the bottom line value that we want to provide. And so far it's worked. But yeah, I think you need like a balance overall for sure.
So when it comes to incentives, you have to do a little bit of math, right? When you take a token and just start gifting it to all the users that you currently have, you are essentially losing that asset. You are just like donating it out, right? Annabelle said that tokens are kind of unique to Web3. That's correct. But I would sort of like to challenge that the incentive model to early users or early participants is unique. If you look at Airbnb, if you look at Uber, they sort of replicated or created something like that in the traditional startup space, right? Look at how they expand to other markets. They are not shy to use the assets that they have as a company to essentially drive the competition out and incentivize the early adopters. But this is not sustainable. They would eventually run out of these assets, right? And so would the Web3 protocols. So eventually you actually have to switch from this model of where you're handing out your own assets, your company's assets to the early users, to something that is sustainable. Otherwise, you will implode.
Yeah, I think we all like to imagine in this beautiful world that our users are our token holders, but that's not necessarily the case, right? I think the reality is it can be, and usually is, a completely separate audience. And so, when it comes to thinking about token incentives, right, like, I think there is no right answer right now, which is why it continues to shift and why patterns and strategies continue to shift. But overall, I think the industry now, as it continues to mature, is starting to shift towards more of a revenue meta. And so I think, eventually, in maybe 3 years or so, it's going to challenge the proposition of the token meta. And we could very well see a world in which, projects launch without necessarily having to launch a token because they're driving decent revenue. I've had conversations with, the Abstract team, right? They're the guys behind Pudgy Penguins. They launched their own L2, and they have really amazing games. It blew my mind in terms of a Web3 game. But the point is, these projects are making millions of dollars in revenue. And, the Abstract team is talking to these projects and say, hey, are you thinking about launching a token? And they're like, why do we need to launch a token? We're making money. And so, I think that is already an early indication that the token meta is being challenged. And so, maybe there is a world that doesn't exist or does exist without having the necessity of the token for projects.
Exactly. It's like, how do we think about, is token your separate product, or how should it actually play a role into bootstrapping the actual product, underlying product? And I think that's a question that I think none of us has really the best answer for, and we'll probably see what happens. But I think the market is going to continue to reward the quality teams that are building with solid business model. Maybe it's tokenomics, maybe it is the more kind of Web2 equity play with revenue. So yeah, I'm personally excited to see how that evolves. And then I think today, because the theme is a bit more institutional driven, I know most of our audience is probably still very crypto native or Web3 focused. But when it comes to institutions, I think that their demand for infrastructure and even ecosystem could look very different. So I'm curious if you guys have had that institutional angle, and how do you think about maybe their requirements around compliance or regulation, or preference for a more permissioned infrastructure versus the more permissionless infra that we're more used to?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because that's mass adoption is kind of what we've wanted, and that requires institutional interest, which we're now seeing. A lot of DeFi projects started as a very small startup, and they weren't really thinking about how are we going to regulate ourselves, and they're not thinking about how are we going to maintain compliance to onboard all these partners. So what we've actually done over the last 5-6 years is we're starting to pivot more into a hybrid model, to where we kind of see ourselves as the bridge between DeFi and institutions. And actually our most recent protocol that we launched, that we call Fusion and Fusion Plus, which are intent swaps. This is essentially what that is it's a way of executing orders on chain from either off or on chain liquidity. And so we're able to have some registered entities that are fully compliant fill these orders, which could actually be, it could be a bank or a hedge fund or any TradFi institution. So I think like a lot of Web3 native projects are going to have to start thinking along these lines of like, how are we going to bridge the gap and like either A, bring the liquidity to TradFi, or B, bring the TradFi liquidity to DeFi or to Web3.
So I will open with chill warning. It's actually really hard for me to answer this question without chilling, because half of what we do is for this exact reason. Imagine that you are JP Morgan, American Bank, and North Korea sends you Ether on Ethereum. You probably shouldn't have that, right?
Or you just pay the fine.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But by default, you actually do have some obligations. You should comply, with something where maybe regular individuals, may not be so strongly obligated to comply with. So definitely, institutions do require a little bit different approach than the retail. They require guarantees. When I said, we prevent hacks so that the principle doesn't get lost, it's again directly aimed at the institutional use case, right? Imagine that you collect, people's life savings and they say, yeah, we will put this on chain and we will make a lot of yield for all of you guys, and then you lose it in one day. Like, that's terrible, right? So institutions definitely apply different measures and different scrutiny to Web3 projects. They definitely want a little bit different approach, and primarily they want guarantees. And I think that as an industry, if we want them to actively participate and actively interact with what I call global blockchain economy, we have to provide them with these conditions. If we do not, obviously they will start looking for a little bit more safe environment, but that means that they will not be present on that chain where the global economy of all the other people is. So I think that, we need to do a lot of work here, and that's why we exist. Shill over.
Institution is a hot buzzword now, just like AI once was. And before that, it was like NFTs. And before that, it was L2s. And then, before that, it was Ethereum killers and all this other stuff. And in all these sort of patterns of trends, I think there's this ego emergence where all of a sudden overnight, everyone's an expert in AI, or everyone's an expert in institutions. Like, being someone who's straight out of college, but this kid knows he's going to bring on the big banks, right? I think like that's a little bit naive. I think the reality here is that, in the next 3 to 5 years, as this true institutional adoption takes place, we're really going to be able to see exactly, who can drive that adoption through mainly regulatory and compliance. I think people tend to think that, okay, you know what, like if we KYC, then everything will be fine. No, that's like tip of the iceberg type stuff, right? Like, but this institutional adoption, to get it beyond Bitcoin, to get it beyond Ethereum, maybe beyond Solana, is going to take a lot of regulatory work. I dare say way more regulatory work than technology work. and these are some of the issues that I've discovered working on some of this stuff over at Manta as well, because, we are building an institutional level product. And, the conversations that I'm having on a day-to-day basis are not with our developers on the product side. It's with the chief compliance officers over at Deutsche Bank. It's with the, former co-founders of GSR and all these other sort of, very heavily compliant institutions. And so the majority of these conversations are all about why you can't do it this way, why you can't do it that way. And so to think that, BlackRock is just going to come in and be like, yeah, we'll take money from all over the world because we're decentralized. Yeah, that works for a $30 million DeFi product that no one cares about, right? But unless they want to see, their spam box full of lawsuits the next day, as well as investigations, then they're not coming in anytime soon until that compliance issue is resolved. And I'd say we're still many years away from that level of adoption. So, for anyone that is building on the institutional side, I would say, my one tip to you is start talking to the compliance officers today, because you just with that knowledge are going to be ahead of the curve compared to any other people that are trying to build institutional grade products.
That's very true. The amount of time we spend on licenses and compliance versus, I think their angle is so different, right? What they care about is maybe not how many TPS or gas per second, but can I do what I need to do in a compliant way? But to your point, maybe we'll see more of that soon. And I think in my experience, things tend to happen quickly, but slowly, but then quickly all at once. I think we're coming up to time. I wanted to maybe just do give you guys 30 seconds each to talk about the milestones you guys are looking forward to the most before the end of the year, and then we'll wrap up the panel today.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to solving the problem of fractured liquidity within the Web3 space, so aka cross-chain. So we want to integrate as many chains as possible and unite DeFi and Web3 all together. So that way, when TradFi is ready to interact with us, we'll be able to provide that liquidity.
We have just released a round of grants. It's nearly $500,000 for the builders on Zircuit. We are specifically looking for applications that complete various flywheels in our ecosystem. So, a lot of DeFi and DeFi and DeFi, but something else as well, if you have a good idea. So we are looking for a lot of builders to come on.
Over at Manta, we're not doing a DAT. We're not going to launch a perp dex. I think those are the hot topics right now. But I do think that, especially in this sort of wave of institutional adoption, one of the very underrated aspects of DeFi is still yet to be exploited. And in that interim, sure, you're probably not going to get BlackRock's money on chain, but there's a lot of opportunity to exploit traditional financial tools, bring them over to DeFi, make them much more efficient, and make the revenue distribution a lot fairer. And so, that's probably as much as I can say right now about some of the things that we're building. But I think that even in the interim before, that massive institutional adoption, there's so much opportunity to make the existing financial system much more efficient and actually a lot more revenue as well, I think, that people should be thinking about the next innovative products being that next generation of boring financial instruments like index funds, like ETFs, but reverse, right? Like, you don't have to list your own ETF on NASDAQ, right? There's a lot of opportunities and a lot of innovation around that right now, even in happening on chain. And so, for everyone in this audience, right? Like if you're a user, I'm really excited to showcase some of the stuff that's coming out from Manta on this sort of financial innovation side in the next probably 3 to 5 months. And if you're a builder, I think there's tons and tons of opportunity for you to think about these sort of next generation financial tools just by looking at the existing financial system and seeing where these bottlenecks are. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Wrap up here.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.